Hi everyone, we're starting Module 4, and in this particular week we start looking at compensation and benefits and retention and motivation. And one of the reasons why these are coupled together is so that you can start to explore how compensation and benefits actually dovetails into retention and motivation. Now, one of the things we've seen through research is that compensation and the benefits package, while important, is not the sole factor that drives motivation and retention. It is important, but it is not the only thing that you have to look at. So I want you to keep that in mind as you start reading through material on retention and motivation. And when you're answering the question on PTO and you're starting to explore compensation and benefits in terms of what people expect, want, desire, do consider how that connects to retention and motivation, and make sure that in your answer you address how those things kind of connect and how the compensation and benefits need to be something that enhances the work experience and helps people feel comfortable at work. And so that in turn helps with overall retention. I mean, the bottom line is if someone feels underappreciated because their compensation isn't related to or equal to or close to what they should be paid based on their skill sets, that has a negative impact on retention and motivation. And for those of you who've been in that position or been at a job where you've worked hard, or even in your career you've seen that with your skill level, your overall benefit or value added to the company, if, if your feelings are that you aren't accurately compensated for that, it does have a negative impact on your willingness to stay. If there aren't other factors that are keeping you there, motivating you to stay, and helping retain you long term. So that's one thing to consider. We talked about retention in terms of the referral, right? One of the reasons that employers will use that, not just because it should help them tap into talent, and you won't recommend someone that you don't believe will do a good job long term because your reputation is also tied to that. But the other side of that is the more of your social network that actually is part of your work environment, that's a retention level. The more likely you are to want to stay regardless of compensation, benefits, and that type of thing. But one of the shifts we've seen in overall environments is this movement toward PTO, which stands for paid time off. So in the past, and in many organizations still today, you would see a set number of sick days that you could take a year, and those were segregated from your vacation time. So let's say that you had 2 weeks vacation time and 5 days of sick leave. Well, for those of us who don't get sick often or don't have to take sick leave, those days just disappear. So in the end, it costs us 5 out of the 15 total days that were allotted to us a year. And one of the things that we would see in the human resource management environment are people saying, well, I'm not sick, but I'm going to take the days because otherwise I lose them. So I might as well take them. So what organizations began to think through and decided to implement was what was called paid time off. And that's where all the days were lumped into one sum. So for instance, if you really got ill, and I'm not talking about benefits of short-term disability, long-term disability, but if you just really got, let's say you caught a flu that really just put you under for 2 solid weeks. Well, you have 3 weeks to work with, because before you'd have 5 days sick leave, 2 weeks vacation, and usually there are measures associated with the vacation, meaning you have to get those days approved before you can actually take them off, so it's not something you could just lump in to sick leave. Well, with paid time off, you could. Or if you're someone who doesn't get sick often, now you've got 3 weeks of vacation instead of 2. Or you've got 2 weeks of vacation and 5 days that you can just take off for personal time that you might need. You are buying a house, need a day off to handle all of the closings and all of those types of things. So it was PTO was a way to actually start morphing the system to benefit kind of on both sides of the table. Those who might be hit with an illness and need more time off, and for those that never got sick but still wanted to take that time as their own. So it's something to consider. How do you view that in an organization? How do you decide what's too much paid time off, what's not enough. And one of the things that you'll often see in organizations, as a new hire coming in, after the first year, I may accumulate a week's vacation, paid vacation. After I've been there 3 years, that may escalate to 2 weeks paid vacation a year. After I've been there 10 years, that may be 3 weeks paid vacation a year. If I'm in an executive leadership position, I might have 4 paid weeks off a year of vacation time. And then sick leave, if we give 5 days of sick leave, that usually doesn't alternate or expand based on position. So if our company's policy is 5 days of sick leave, and usually that's accumulated over time, you work so many hours, you get this much time, put into your sick leave bucket. Now what we do is we take that, and if before you were in an executive leadership position and you had 4 weeks of paid vacation and 5 days of sick leave, now you have a total of 5 weeks to do with as you please. So one of the things this question is asking you to do is consider what's too much, what's not enough, and at what levels might that change as a larger benefit for specific type of executive positions or management positions throughout. So keep that in mind, because that's part of kind of the art, is finding that balance within the environment and trying to kind of consider how that works. Now, some of the things we're not talking about in this particular question, although you might want to consider, are some of the other benefits you can wrap up in that. We can wrap up things like flex time that allow people to determine when they're coming into work. Maybe we have an environment where for knowledge workers, if they want to work from midnight to 6 a.m., that works, right? They don't have to be in the office from 8 to 5. So sometimes there's flexible work schedules like that. Sometimes for knowledge workers, we may have a benefit that says, here's your job, here's what has to get done, the amount of time you have to put into that, that's up to you. Because one of the things we typically run into is, is it about how much time someone's butt sits in the seat, or is it about the work they're doing? What are we paying them for? Are we paying for the time they're sitting in that seat in our organization, no matter what they're doing there, at least they're there? Or are we paying them for the type and quality of work that they're completing? And organizations have no trouble with the fact that you may be on salary working 80 hours a week. But you start getting into a conversation of, okay, you've paid me to do this job. It's a full-time salaried position. I mean, I'm getting a salary. But you're paying me for this work. Well, I can do this work in 25 hours a week. And it's high quality. It's what you're paying me for. The value is set at that much money. Why is it okay for me to spend double the amount of time a week working on it, but not 3/4 of the amount of time or 50% of the amount of time if the quality of the work is the same? And that's a dilemma faced by many organizations, and something that starts to be thought through, because especially with Generation Y is very focused on balance and having a balanced life. Generation X, very much, and that's my generation, has very much been focused on being able to have time away from work. One of the things we saw when massive layoffs started to occur in the 80s especially is that the baby boomers, who had kind of came from that silent generation set of parents that said you dedicate your whole life to this organization and your life is about work, has gone away. That kind of unstated contract disappeared when it became very prevalent to let people go no matter what kind of loyalty they'd shown to an organization. And the bottom line is, organizations aren't loyal to you. They don't love you. They don't have feelings. Organizations are about survival most of the time, right? Thriving and surviving. And how you fit into that puzzle as a human resource has an effect on how you're treated within that organization. So as people, we tend to be very loyal, but what has broken down as employees is Gen X and Gen Y have really said we want balance. We want a personal life. Our life isn't about work or career. We will certainly engage in it and do a good job of it, but it's going to take more to engage us than just a paycheck. We're not driven as strongly by the organizational goals. So that has also become something that ties into retention and motivation, in that it's become very important that instead of extrinsic motivators, that the organization says, here's the carrot, here's the stick, and I'm going to try to push you and motivate you this way. Instead, organizations and human resource management departments and managers as a whole really need to find the way to tap into the intrinsic motivators of people, the things that drive them internally. And if you can make a connection with those things and tie them into organizational goals, you have a much higher level of internal motivation from that employee that you don't have to oversee or manage as like you do when it's an extrinsic motivation situation. So one of the things I want you to realize as we go through this entire series of modules is that I'm having you do a lot of math, using a lot of metrics, and this is what I call the science of human resource management, right? It's the hard science of it. What we talk about in these videos and the nuance of what I want you to also kind of wrap into your answers is the art of it, right? There's also an art to dealing with people, to dealing effectively with these issues. The hard numbers tell a story, but that story isn't complete. You have to add all these other nuances onto it, all these other considerations about the human element, and as you do that, you start to get a much more complete story that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And that helps you make much stronger decisions in terms of human resource management and management as a whole. So consider the nuances as you start answering this question and you look at the expense. And as you do that math and you come to your conclusions based on just the math, then I want you to consider that layer of retention and motivation and what that does to the equation. And how do you layer that on and now consider your numbers through a slightly different perspective of, okay, will this help us retain employees? Will this help motivate employees? How might that look at different levels within the organization? What other kind of benefits could we actually wrap into the compensation package that, while maybe not costing us much money, will have a very positive impact overall on retention levers and motivational factors coupled with this PTO plan? So go beyond just the science. Work through some of the nuanced art of it. And that's really going to make you stronger as a manager in organizations, because it helps you start to see the complexity of these things, and that it's not just running an equation and coming up with a mathematical picture and then saying, well, that just means this, right? It's not as linear as that. A plus B doesn't always automatically lead you to C. There's other things you have to factor in there. So take that into consideration. I really look forward to seeing your answers as you start posting them. Now, the one other thing I'm going to add on to this is the midterm exam. Do not freak out. You have been preparing for the midterm all along. Go back and look at your PowerPoints. Go back and look at the discussion boards and the discussions you've been having. This is going to be an essay exam. You have 5 hours to get through the exam. Once you start it, you need to complete it. I don't in any way expect you to have to take the 5 hours, but it gives you enough time to get comfortable and get into the material. Think through what we've already talked about. Rewatch the videos. They're not that long if you feel like you need that kind of backup and reinforcement. And then just sit down and think through what you're doing. Make sure you have enough time and a quiet place, and that you can use all your materials, so have them with you. Make sure that you give me links to material we've covered. In other words, if you make a statement of fact, back it up with something. Your opinions are not good enough, right? So there's enough time for you to pull in the supporting material to explain why your answer is correct. And so I expect that level to be there, but you have time to do it. Okay, if you have questions leading into the exam, let me know. Once you start the exam, if you have any problems, email me and we'll reset it. I would highly recommend that you write your answers in Word and save them, and then you can copy and paste them over into the quiz board as you go. Good luck on the exam. I look forward to seeing you this week in the discussion boards, and I hope you have a good July 4th.